welcome back to Biblical Insights with Bob. Tonight I want to look at a New Testament story. It's one that we're all familiar with. But I want to apply it to you and I. Are you a worrier? I tend to get caught up in my struggles and some of the things that's going on around us. But I realize we live in a troubled culture. It's easy to get worried and let our faith in God waver when we see all that's happening around us. Just think about it. All you have to do is look at the media and the news. So tonight I want to look at a passage from the Gospel of Mark that deals with this wavering faith. That passage is found in Mark 4, verses 35 to 41. Now we all know the story, as I've said, about Jesus calming the storm. So let's read it. Mark 35. On that day when evening came, he said to them, "Let's go over to the other side." So leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and the other boats were with him. And there arose a gale of wind, and the waves were breaking up over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Now they became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Go back to the beginning. Notice in verse 36, it says, they took him just as he was. Now, if we go all the way back to verse 1 of this chapter, we note that it says, he began to teach again by the sea, and such a very large crowd gathered to him that he got into a boat in the sea and sat down, and the whole crowd was by the sea on the land. So he was already in the boat teaching. And they left without even going ashore. Now, very likely Jesus was tired from teaching all day, and the disciples were looking for some time away from the crowds as well. They'd been there in the boat with him. So they took off across the ocean to get some rest, to get some peace. So you might well say that this storm came in their line of duty, or at least after a day of duty or labor. So really it came kind of at their weak moment when they were looking for more than continued fighting. They were looking for some rest and solitude. Doesn't that sound like our situation? Now notice the next statement. And I've always thought this was very interesting. It said, and other boats were with him. Now, why do you suppose that statement's in there? As we look at the situation, I believe we can again see an application in our lives today. Undoubtedly, other boats were watching the lives and activities of Jesus and the disciples. So they were there, but they were focused on Jesus' boat. Now, again, when he calmed the storm, they benefited from the miracle because they were in the storm too. And likely they asked the same question, who then is this that even the winds obey him? So there were other little boats. And I want to remind us, people are watching you and me and how we respond. There's an important lesson there in that one statement for us. Now, Verse 37 describes a storm as a fierce gale of wind with the waves breaking over the boat that the boat was already filling up. Now, think about this. The disciples were fishermen and they were used to dealing with this sort of thing. They were experts in dealing with storm. But this one was different. Now, remember I said they were experts in dealing with storm. Notice that he let them deal with the storm until they called for his help. Could it be that too many times we think we can handle our storms or our worries or our problems on our own, so we don't call for him? So now I want us to look at 3 questions in this few verses we read. And I want us to apply them to our own lives as we face the storms in our lives. Now, the first question, Master, don't you care? You ever been there? Wonder, how could he let this happen to me? This was a question that the disciples asked of Jesus. We might say that this is a relational question. What's our relationship to him? How much do we trust him? Now, remember it said Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat. Now, was this because he didn't care? I don't think so. I believe he was asleep for 2 reasons. Number 1, he was exhausted. He'd been teaching all day. He was tired. So I believe he was sleeping because he was exhausted. Secondly, and this probably is even more important, I think he slept because of his faith. He knew who was in charge of the storm. If we really knew, couldn't we sleep? Now, his disciples probably have mistaken his absence for lack of concern. He was asleep because he didn't care. But I kind of wonder if maybe he wouldn't have stilled the storm until they called him anyway. Now, of the 3 questions we're going to look at, this is the only one that received an answer. Verse 39 says, he got up and rebuked the wind and the sea. Hush, be still. That's the way he answered it. Master, don't you care? He got up and said, be still. He answered the question. Yes, he cared. I like the Amplified Bible's version of this verse. Let me read it to you. And he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, hush now, be stilled, or muzzled. And the wind ceased, and I like this phrase, it sank to rest as if exhausted by its own beating. Can't you just see that? Exhausted by its own beating. And there was immediately a great calm or a perfect peacefulness. Oh, to have him speak to our storms. Now let's look at the second question. Why are you afraid? Luke says, where's your faith? Now, in the Message, Eugene Peterson paraphrases, why can't you trust me? Where is your faith? Why can't you trust me? The question kind of implies, is your faith in yourselves? Why is it that we delegate only those things to him we can't handle ourselves? It's only when we begin to lose control that we cry for him to help. For example, medically we trust our doctor until he says it's cancer. Relationally, we argue and feud with our spouse until they say, okay, I'm through. Financially, we trust ourselves and we turn to him only when the last dollar's gone. Our faith is in ourselves until we come to the point where we realize it's beyond us. Remember that Jesus could sleep because he knew where to place his faith. Now, we live in a world of anxiety and worry, and I've quoted some other versions. The King James says that ye have no faith. How much experience does it take to ensure our faith? Now, remember what they had been through. They'd watched him feed 5,000 people. They'd watched him heal. They'd watched him turn the water into wine. And he says, can't you trust me yet? Now, this question doesn't have an answer. We all have to answer it for ourselves. Can't we trust him yet? Look back at all he's done for us. Look back at what we've seen accomplished through prayer and answers to prayer. And then he asks us, can't we trust him yet? What a question. Now, the third question was asked again by the disciples. Who then is this? It's a reflective question. Notice use the word then. Who then is this? They'd seen what he'd done. If all these things are so, who then, even the wind and the sea, obey him? So you see, man seems to have everything under control. That's so much truth in that in our age. We can predict, but we can't control the weather. But Jesus can command, and the wind responds. Now, look at these other scripture references with me. Psalms 65:7. Who stills the roaring of the sea, the roaring of the waves, and the tumult of the peoples? And then in the prophet Nahum, chapter 1, verse 3, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord would by no means leave the guilty unpunished. And here's what I have underlined. In the whirlwind and storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. So this verse indicates, who then is this, indicates that they were more afraid of him than the storm. Now, Jesus said in Matthew 10:28, do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. Can we become too familiar with him and lose that sense of awe? One of the things when I pray and I begin to think about the first part of the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy. When I begin to think of who he really is, then I stand in awe. Now, this third question, who then is this, is also unanswered. This is the point, I believe, of the Scripture, who Jesus was and is. When they understood and could answer this, they could develop the answer to the second question, where is your faith, or why no faith? The answer to the solution is of miracles. I don't believe in Jesus because of his miracles, but in the miracles because of who he is. Don't you like that? I don't believe in Jesus because of his miracles, but in the miracles because of who he is. You see, this is a question that every one of us, every person, has to answer for himself. Who then is this that we're serving? So, all this comes down to this. What's our problem today? Is it a relationship that's hurting? Is it a medical situation? Is it an economic or financial difficulty or uncertain? Or is it related to our jobs? Is it employment relation? Or is it a spiritual battle you're struggling with? Think about the questions. Why are you afraid? Where is your faith? And finally, and most importantly, Who is Jesus really in your life? Thank you for joining us for this. I hope you'll think about these questions. You see, it wasn't just questions we're asking a boat, but it's questions we need to ask today in our lives, in our storms.